Every semester, the Wealth and Poverty theme invites a prominent speaker from outside to talk about issues related to poverty, inequality, and empowerment in our society. This spring, three interdisciplinary institutions have worked together to host this public lecture. The Entrepreneurship Center from Business School and the Buena Beach School of Leadership and Public Affairs and the Wealth and Poverty theme. So we will continue to work together to fight poverty and inequality in the local community as well as abroad. So that's what we try to do. And today, Dr. Millicent, Judy Millicent. Okay, come here. I will let Dr. Millicent introduce our honorable speaker today. Would you come on here?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time up here because you didn't come to listen to me talk, but I am really greatly honored to introduce our speaker, Deborah Frieze, here today. I was introduced to Deborah in two ways. The first way was through a book that she wrote called Walk Out, Walk On, which I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about. Inspiring stories of people who have walked out of situations that weren't working for them to walk on to create the communities and the situations that were in fact working for them or will work for them in the future. And the second way that I had an opportunity to interact with her before today was I was fortunate enough to interview her to ask her questions about what would be in the perfect nonprofit management curriculum, and to share her thoughts about what it was that nonprofit leaders, social entrepreneurs, needed to know before they entered into the workforce. And not surprisingly, she had plenty of thoughts, some of which I'm sure she'll share with you today. So without further ado, please let me introduce and welcome to Ohio University, Deborah Frieze. That in true academic fashion, the front row is open.
Well, we might have to mess around with you guys a little bit with that. I don't know what's going to happen because this is going to be a little bit interactive. I'm going to do some talking. I hope to hear a little bit from you, and toward the end, you all will talk to each other. I'm really delighted to be here. For those of you who have read the book or seen it, there's a chapter on Columbus, Ohio, and it's one of the places that really innovative work is going on, and you may not know that sitting right here in Athens. So I had the privilege of being with one of my dear friends that I wrote about last night and reconnecting to this place. But one thing I'm really happy about, and you all showing up here today, is I needed some friends to help me celebrate my 15th anniversary of when I became a walkout. So you can clap if you know what that means, but for those of you who don't know what that means, we're gonna talk about that. So I first heard the term walkouts who walk on from my friend Manish Jain in India. So Manish was running a community center called Shikshantar in Udaipur, and a lot of young people were gathering there to figure out how they could make a contribution that would matter. And many of those young people were high school dropouts. And that was the term that had been given to them by teachers, right, by the school administrators, by parents. They had failed school and there wasn't any point in them going back, and they were wandering out on their own. So they were failures. But as Manish got to know these young people, he found out that that wasn't really true. That's not what seemed to be actually happening in their lives. How they were spending their time is some of them were going around and finding master craftspeople in the community and learning a trade. And others were sitting down with getting connected to the ancestry and the lineage in that community that was starting to disappear. And still other young people were gathering their peers and saying, let's sit down and have a meaningful conversation about what matters most to us at this age and stage of our lives. And Manish said, you know, I don't think that you failed school. I think that school failed you. School was creating a place in which you were supposed to pass tests and become workers. He called it factory schooling. Now, I think we have to be careful about whether we assume that's a problem only in India, right? He said, you wanted to be active learners. So rather than calling yourselves dropouts like you failed, what if we renamed this community of young people? What if we declared ourselves walkouts? People turning their back on a system that didn't give them the joy and the possibility that they wanted to, and that they started to walk on to create meaningful learning for themselves out in the world. And it began a global network. And so there are a network of walkouts who walk on all over the world, not just young people, all kinds of people walking out of business, walking out of medicine, walking out of all types of assumptions about the way things are, walking out of the status quo, not to give up on the idea of what those systems were built to create, but to give up on the form in which the deterioration of some of those systems, the bureaucracy that has emerged, which we're going to talk about a little bit. So before I go any further, I want to get a sense of who's in the room. So how many of you suspect you know someone who might identify as a walkout? And how many of you think that it's possible that some part of your life, either in the past or now, there's somewhere in your life that you think you might be a walkout? All right, and so then there's this question of what is she talking about? So let me share with you my walkout story. I am a recovered dot-commer. So many of you are too young to remember this, but that was the name given in the late 1990s to those of us who were internet revolutionaries. We were going to launch online products and services that were going to change the world and democratize everything. We really believed this. Everyone would have a voice. Everything would be collaborative and crowdsourced. Multinational corporations would no longer rule the world. So we were wrong. And I had to learn that the hard way. I was graduated from business school in 1998 at a time when venture capital money was falling off of trees for anyone who had an internet business plan. There were 8 of us who co-founded the company, and before we even graduated, they had given us $2 million in seed funding to get this company off the ground. A year later, we were 25 young people, most of us in our 20s, in the back of a sweaty one-room loft in downtown Boston, when some much bigger venture capitalists walked in the door with $100 million to grow our business. Okay, that was a really irrational thing to happen. So we were an internet consulting company. That means we went into Fortune 500 companies and small startups, and we advised them on what they should do with the internet. People actually didn't know what to do with it back then. So there was no product that you could scale up and sell. There was just a consulting service, and I know not everyone here is familiar with business, but you can't spend $100 million really fast to grow a people business. There's nothing to do with that money. This was part of the insanity that was happening at the time in this era. And we had a vote inside the company. There were 8 of us. 5 of us voted to accept the money. 3 of us, I was on the losing team, voted not to because it seemed crazy. And soon we were inundated with capital and a new middle-aged white male management team that was going to run our company. So for the first 18 months, it worked. We grew the company to 950 people in 6 offices really fast. And then the dot-com bubble burst. Right? So what that means is that Wall Street no longer valued the over-speculation and hyper-inflation that was going on in the internet boom. In fact, it was at 6:30 a.m. on a morning in October of 2000, the day we were scheduled to go public, that I got an emergency phone call saying, come in, we've got to make a decision whether or not to pull the IPO. And we did pull the IPO, and it turned out that was a good idea because that was the day the market lost its most value in history up till that time, in that single day. So now the bubbles burst, what happens? Everybody is behaving badly. So people are panicking, they're blaming each other, they're trying to manipulate our finances to tell a better story. Not illegal, what we were doing, but definitely unethical. They were grasping to hold on to their jobs. They were fearing the loss of value in their stock options. It was a very chaotic time. And I had this front row seat for watching the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about business and human kindness, right? So we suddenly needed to make a whole lot of performance cuts. We had 950 people, and we had to get it down to 150 people fast. And I was one of the unlucky people asked by senior management to go and make what they were saying would be performance cuts rather than layoffs. So what that means is they were hoping that we could get rid of people saying they hadn't performed well rather than laying them off and having to pay expensive severance fees. So I had a decision to make. Resign now and let someone else carry out that mission, or accept it and find a way to try and carry it out with integrity and compassion. So I stayed, and I traveled to 4 of our 6 offices, and I held dozens of incredibly difficult one-on-one conversations, letting people go and telling them the truth about what was going on inside of our company, rather than blaming them for poor performance. It was heartbreaking work. When I got home, I handed in my resignation letter, and then I walked out. So I was deeply disillusioned and very confused. I had always thought that there was an innate human goodness in people, that we were naturally inclined toward generosity, and this experience had really shaken that belief to the core, right? I had seen 5 or 6 people, especially in our senior executive team, behaving really badly. They were greedy, they were manipulative, they were self-absorbed and uncaring, and they put their interests ahead of everyone else. I didn't know what to do with that thought. I thought, these people are the problem, right? They're the problem. Maybe even business is the problem. Possibly capitalism is the problem. So I was left in the state of everything I've learned is wrong, now what? So I was really fortunate at the time to have a mentor named Peter Block. And when I told Peter my story, he said something very interesting to me. He said, you know, these are not bad people. They're playing by the rules of a very flawed game. So go take another look at the game that they're playing. So this was my first introduction to systems thinking. The game that we were playing, all of us at the time, was what you might call Wall Street casino capitalism, right? Or the extractive economy, which we're going to talk about a lot today, which is one of the great sources of wealth and inequality. Or what my friend David Korten likes to call the dying suicide economy. He says the economy that we're in right now is a dying suicide economy. It's heading toward inevitable destruction. That kind of game that we were playing. And that game of global capitalism is organized around a particular set of values. And the values that global capitalism is organized around, right, is profit maximization, resource extraction, growth, and efficiency, all measured through quarterly returns. That's the game that we are all participating in playing around the world today. So what I learned from Peter Block is if you take a systems thinking approach, you will see that the structure of a system determines the behavior in the system, okay? So let me give you an example. So I grew up in the backyard playing basketball with my brothers. And of course, we didn't have a referee back there to uphold the 3-second rule, right? The 3-second rule is when an offensive player can't stand up the basket for more than 3 seconds at a time. He has to step out of the lane. So my taller, older brothers would just hang out under the hoop, blocking me out and making the game a little less fair and a little bit more rough. Right? Well, that's actually the way that the game of basketball was played for the first 40 years of its history. The 3-second rule emerged as a solution to the problem of roughness in the lane under the basket. So they changed the rule, and when they added the rule, the behavior in the game changed. Right? So here's the first really important thing to remember from this conversation, which is that system structure determines system behavior. In global capitalism, the structure is to measure quarterly returns. The behavior is to do whatever it takes to make those returns grow. That's what I was witnessing back at my .com company. The thing is, nobody actually anticipated that. It's not like somebody sat down and designed an economy that would generate manipulation and greed. At least that's not what I believe, right? Some people might try and make that case, but I don't actually think that's the case. The reason that our economic system generates the behavior that it does is exactly because it was not planned. It's a complex, emergent, living system, not a machine. And that runs counter to everything we've been taught about how we see our world, okay? Somewhere along the way, in modern development, maybe around the time of Isaac Newton, we got confused about how life works, right? We convinced ourselves that the world was causal, linear, and predictable. And so we began treating our bodies, our communities, and our ecologies as if they were machines, right? So machines, this is such a classic relationship between man and machine. Machines respond really well to planning, right? They generally, not always, follow the manual. They rely on designers and engineers to give them purpose, right? A machine would never criticize the 5-year plan or lose faith in the boss. Thankfully, that's not how we are, and that's not how life is. Natural systems, living systems, are complex, emergent, and unpredictable. If we look at any ecological system, we will find diversity, change, death, chaos, and order. We'll find growth that moves to decay, that comes into new life. Everywhere we look, we will find ever-deepening levels of complexity and variety, right? So this is the second important tenet in living systems thinking, which is that living systems are complex, emergent, and unpredictable. And every system we humans participate in is a living system, right? That includes education, healthcare, government, business, all these big bureaucratic systems that we've created to coordinate human activity, only to discover that the behaviors they generate sometimes get just about as rough as two big guys elbowing each other under the basket. In a game, you can change the rules to generate different behavior. But with our big systems, the ones that many of us care so much to try and change, the thing is they've become so unwieldy that it's hard to see where the rules or structures are that are defining the system. And that's why so many of our efforts to create change defy those efforts. We're unable to. We try and we make these plans. We coordinate effort, and still those systems give us the results that we weren't hoping to have. Right? So I would like to spend the rest of our time together to offer a radical theory of change that puts most of our efforts to fix our world on their heads. And we'll have a little bit of time to wrestle with it together. So here it is. You can't fundamentally change big systems. You can only abandon them and start over, or offer hospice to what's dying. So I'm being deliberately provocative here. So when you make a flat out statement like that, it's like, what? We can't change big systems? It's an invitation to you, and it's an invitation I hold for myself to really challenge myself and what my beliefs are about how I can operate in the world and where will my attention make a difference. So I'm gonna say this one more time. I hope it's provocative, right? Which is that you can't fundamentally change big systems. You can only abandon them and start over, or offer hospice to what's dying. So to find our way through this, I'm going to start by offering us a map. So maps orient us. They help us tell a story about how we see the world. And right now, I believe the maps we've been using have gotten us tragically lost. So here's a new map, a living systems map for what we can do to change our world. All right, so it goes like this. All systems rise, peak, and move into decline. At some point, usually around the peak, where it gets uneven up there, signs of turbulence appear, right? Disruptions in supply, spikes in demand, volatility in pricing. That's when we start to see alternatives to the dominant system. I call these alternatives walkouts, right? People who turn their back on the way it is to be free to experiment with creating something new. If these walkouts remain isolated from one another, the dominant system will crush, absorb, or co-opt the pioneers, because every living system is inclined towards self-preservation. There's no moral judgment here, okay? A system is designed to preserve itself. That's what we all do. And even if it's a system that includes humans, it's a living system. So it's not saying to the alternatives, you're bad. It's just saying, oh, you're a threat to my ongoing state. So it will attempt often to simply co-opt them and bring them into itself. However, if these walkouts get connected, exchanging information and learning, then suddenly their separate efforts can emerge as a powerful system capable of disrupting the old order and giving birth to something new. So how many of you, let me offer an example. How many of you, either here in the homes that you come from, grow your own food or have participated in a community garden or buy food directly from farmers at a farmer's market or community through CSAs, community supported agriculture? Right? Like definitely more than half that was in this room. So 40 years ago, no one was talking about local and organic food, right? We were all eating the foods in this country, mostly, of industrial agriculture, right? The technology and chemically intensive food system that has dominated this country for most of our lifetimes. But that system actually has begun to peak, and we know that because crops require increasingly expensive and toxic inputs to produce the same yields. We're getting less, it costs us more and we're getting less. That's a sign that the system is peaking. And that's when we start to see alternatives from walkouts, creating healthy local food, start to appear, right? That's when local and organic agriculture began to start spreading itself. And as the efforts of these pioneers of healthy food became stronger and more visible, people began to abandon the old system and leap onto the new one. Now, none of us, unless you're living on a farm, right, we're not eating 100% local and organic, but it's becoming very, very visible and accessible, right? Today, there are more than 6,000 CSAs nationally. The number of farmers markets is skyrocketing. And, you know, we've got Walmart and Costco with their organic local food. Now, that may be co-option, but at least it's getting that into the mainstream. So let me just pause on this and let's see if we can have any other examples of where we see a dominant system, right, and a new alternative that's starting to come in and get real traction. Does anyone have any examples to offer here? In the back, speak really loudly. Yeah, so, right, getting whether it was like VHS cassettes, DVDs, renting them, and now everything's streaming. So definitely a disruptive technology.
Energy, it's not like the use of solar panels is creating energy for your house, and that's as opposed to everyone getting energy from whatever is the dominant.
Yeah, so she said energy. I mean, it's a great example. It's one of the easiest ones to talk about today, because if we call that the fossil fuel-based economy, and we call that the renewable energy economy, I'm going to take this off because it's making noise. What we'll find is that while in the United States we're maybe not all the way up the curve, Iceland is 100% renewable energy, right? Totally disrupted the old energy system, right? There was another one in the back?
The emergence of like local craft breweries.
Yeah. So local craft breweries. So I'm going to say that's part of this, thank you, big localist movement, which is going back to relocalizing our manufacturing, our products and services. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. So we're seeing this everywhere, the shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy. We see it from conventional architecture to green building, right? And then from Wall Street and global finance to Main Street and crowdsourced capital, where we see the Kickstarters and the Indiegogos, and as of May 16th, there's going to be a lot more of that because the laws are changing, right? The thing is, nobody planned these shifts. We find ourselves in situations where lots of leaders like to step forward and take credit for these changes. Right? And sometimes as citizens, because we're so stuck in the heroic leader mindset, we like to give credit to our favorite innovators. But the truth is that these are what we call emergent phenomena, right? So emergence is at the heart of this worldview. And it's nature's way of creating change, not the way we've been taught from machine mind and the industrial mind. Nature's way of creating change. And emergence is, I'm going to try and show it to you this way. Emergence is tricky to see, and it's hard to describe, okay? But we know it's present. This is the farmer's market example. We know it's present when local actions spring up simultaneously in many different areas, get connected, and then suddenly emerge as a powerful system. So it is not about the number of dots on the screen where the emergence of the new system has. It's about clusters and connections, right? So this is where, if anybody's like started to look at network theory, and certainly anybody who's been studying ecology, when those dots start to cluster and people come into relationship with each other, exchanging ideas, creativity, practices, and knowledge, they start to trust each other. They send that information from one place to another place, just like a pollinator carrying information around. That's when the magic happens and large-scale systems change can emerge. So let's actually talk about pollinators, because this is where we get some of the ideas about how to understand the power of emergence, right? Nothing is a better teacher than hive insects like bees or termites. So meet my bees. I'm a beekeeper. I've got 2 hives right outside my bedroom window at home in Boston. And it's an incredible privilege to witness this act in nature's way of coordinating complexity, right? It's not about the number of bees. The number of bees doesn't give you the clue about the remarkable intelligence of the hive. It's the flow of information between the bees that gives rise to the hive's coherent behavior, right? And no matter how intently scientists try to study the individual bee, they never get the intelligence of the hive. Yet once the hive forms, each and every bee acts with the intelligence and the skillfulness of the whole. So emergence has really profound implications for those of us who want to change the world, right? Rather than take this bird's eye view of our system, right, our hive, and trying to reverse engineer or strategically plan our way out of the mess that we're in, we'd be better off taking a page from the termite handbook, right, and keeping our feet solidly on the ground. I believe it is through small, local actions alongside people who share our visions and dreams that we create the conditions for change. So that's why I'm a localist. 3 years ago, I started a new enterprise called the Boston Impact Initiative. We are working to create the conditions for a just and sustainable economy to emerge in my hometown. And we do this by providing capital. We lend money and we make equity investments to locally owned enterprises that are attempting to address the growing wealth gap and ecological challenges of our times. We are not trying to reform corporate capitalism. That's not our interest. We are working to pioneer a regenerative economy that puts the well-being of people and place at the center of our economic activity. This means that it's an inquiry around the values that we hold, right, as opposed to the forms and the structures that we use. So in order for me to make this visible, I'd like to share a story of a particular enterprise that I believe exemplifies the kind of economic activity I'd like to be involved in. So I want to introduce you to Cerro Co-op. Cerro is a worker-owned organic waste recycling cooperative that was formed by 2 grassroots member-based organizations from the Black and Latino communities, 2 populations that have been disproportionately and systematically excluded from economic opportunity. This is the grassroots coming together. They'd never done business before, stepping into entrepreneurship. And I want to show you a short 4-minute video that will make visible how Cerro is walking out and walking on to create a just and sustainable economy.
The word came out about this new opportunity they called the green economy. A light bulb went off in my head when it said that this was an opportunity where people could create businesses and jobs for themselves.
My name is Stephen Evans.
Soy Josefina Luna.
Soy Evelyn Fuentes.
Laura Holmes.
Guadalupe González.
Timothy Hall.
And I'm a worker owner.
Trabajadora y dueña.
Worker owner.
Dueña y trabajadora.
And I'm a worker owner at Zero.
Zero is a full-service, source separation, recycling, reduction, and organic composting business serving restaurants in Roxbury, Dorchester, and East Boston. A group of folks who are from those communities came together, wanted to create jobs for themselves, and wanted to have a cooperative business that adhered to this triple bottom line: planet, people, and profits.
Zero was the answer. Workers from unemployed and underemployed backgrounds coming together on their own initiative to form an enterprise, that respects their individuality, their needs, respects their labor, and also does this great service to the community by helping to drive recycling up.
In 2014, there's going to be an organic waste ban where all the restaurants, commercial businesses have to start composting the organic waste. And so there's a huge opportunity to have a business that can take advantage of this new market.
Por cada libra de comida que se sirve en un restaurante, hay media libra que es basura. Cuando nosotros vamos a recoger los desechos de comida de los restaurantes, nosotros vamos a hacer abono. Entonces nosotros eso lo vamos a llevar a la farm y eso va a producir los nuevos alimentos, los vegetales, las frutas, y ese es el alimento que va a volver a nuestras mesas.
Well, what speaks to me is we pay a lot of money for our trash pickup here. So I think being a one-stop pickup point, the one-stop recycling plus the compost plus the trash is unique.
When I was first hearing the term about cooperatives, it was the same term that they use about the green economy, green pathways out of poverty.
Ya no vamos a estar dependiendo de esas grandes compañías que solo que solo quieren lucrarse de nuestro trabajo.
And it's really good because it's the first co-op between low-income Afro-Americans and low-income Latinos working together.
So we have all this melting pot of people, but if we could just blend together and work together, that becomes a great political power and a great financial power.
Vamos a subsistir nosotros mismos y va a quedar en la misma comunidad. Uno mismo gana el dinero y lo distribuye o lo gasta aquí mismo.
Zero is an opportunity to show that we're stepping up and we're at the table.
We're interested in changing how restaurant recycling and disposal gets done, but also in changing how local investment gets done. So this campaign is to raise the seed money to create the structure for local investment. Local people are going to be able to become equity investors in Cerro Co-op and help buy the machinery and equipment to run the business.
The way that Cerro is trying to create local investment vehicles for local individuals as a way of financing their company is great for me, and I want to be a part of them being tremendously successful because I really do want to see this proliferate, and I think it's part of a vision for a just and sustainable future that we have to start acting toward as well as thinking toward.
Okay, so before I make any comments, I actually want to give you all a chance to digest it a little bit. So I'd like to invite you to turn to a neighbor and just share what inspired you or challenged you or excited you about what you just saw, just to absorb what you just saw. So just take a few minutes for that. Okay, let's see if we can come back. I would love to hear just a few comments if anybody wants to share. What are some of your reactions to that or questions? Yeah, so it's a bilingual company. That means things go slower, right, so that everybody's included. But it's one of the assumptions that we have that that's really hard. It's not hard. It's just something that we believe. It's inefficient. So that bothers us in the status quo model. But to stop and translate so that everybody feels included has a lot of power in it. So it's tricky, but they work bilingually. Yeah, great. Other comments, questions, reactions? Yeah. Yeah, they're really pointing in the same direction very deeply. You know, I think Sarah's story is extraordinary for a number of reasons, not the least of which is in many cities in this country, the waste hauling industry is dominated by organized crime, right? So it's a really hard industry to break into. Sarah wasn't fighting for their place at the table. What they did is they put relationships at the center of everything that they were doing. Right, so they went to the bodegas and the restaurants in the low-income communities where they lived, places that were often overlooked by other players. And everyone said to them, not those folks, but everyone in the city is like, there's no way you guys are going to be successful. You don't have the knowledge, you don't have the capital, you don't have the social networks, you don't have the credit history. How are you going to get contracts? There's no way you're going to succeed. And they were undeterred. They said, we have what we need. We know how to learn, we're adaptable, and we trust each other, right? So essentially, they're embracing the belief that life is complex, emergent, and unpredictable, and that we humans are fundamentally creative, curious, and capable. We have what we need to do this. So I want to go through what's in the Sarah story because it's a massive shift in values from the extractive economy mindset to the regenerative economy. So there's several things, and that will show where Sarah is walking out of the old ways and walking on to create something different. So I'm going to show you 5 major shifts in values, and these are not just about Sarah, right? To me, this is 5 value shifts that are at the heart of wealth and inequality. All right, so the first one is around ownership. You hear many people at Sarah saying, with pride, I'm a worker owner, right? I think ownership may be the highest leverage point for change in this country, right? So you're looking at, I'll give you an example from my city. The net assets for a white family in Boston is $256,000. The net assets for a black family is $700. Right now, you want to be an entrepreneur. Tim talked about pathways out of poverty. You want to be an entrepreneur and you've got $700 in your whole family of assets and your social network is in a similar situation. How are you supposed to get started? How do we shift one of the root causes in our system, which has to do with who has a right to own and control their own future, right? It's not equally distributed. And if we don't, this is the problem with inequality. The foundation of inequality is the distribution of ownership. The more wealth you have, the more wealth you can create. If you do not have access to wealth or assets, you cannot build wealth or assets. That is a fundamental problem. So when I work with entrepreneurs and they can't get a bank loan, and they can't borrow from friends and family, and they can't get venture capital, and they can't put a personal loan against their home, it's impossible to make that shift out of poverty. Now, there's another whole conversation that we probably don't have time for today, which is that I don't actually believe that it's right for us to own and control everything. I don't think air or water or earth should be under anybody's ownership. But that's a different piece of the story. right? Right now, what Cero is doing is shifting our paradigm from ownership in the hands of the few to ownership in the hands of the many. Every single worker is an owner of the company. And even better, I don't know if you caught this, how many people here have ever heard of a direct public offering? Yeah, so when you go public, when you sell your company to the public, you do it as an IPO, initial public offering, and people can buy shares of it through brokers. A direct public offering means nobody is in the way. I can go to my neighbors and say, would you like to become an owner of my company? So instead of having your company be owned by anonymous people who are far away, in which Wall Street is taking a cut and taking the wealth out of your community, Cero is owned entirely by workers and neighbors. It's an extraordinary shift, and we have to think about ownership at the center. The second one, right, Tim talks about the opportunity to create businesses and jobs for ourselves, the jobs piece, and not being exploited by big companies. You know, the way that our extractive economy works is that it believes it has the right to squeeze as much value as possible out of the fixed unit of a human being. That's good business, right? So when we shift from an extractive economy that says the more impoverished you are, the more likely we are to extract your labor, so particularly where race and class comes in, and we again repeat the cycle of poverty. What about creating opportunity for not only jobs that are livelihoods that can actually support our family, meaning a fair wage, right? But what about the piece of lives that give us jobs that give us dignity and respect, right? So I was sharing with others earlier today that yesterday when I was driving in from the airport, there was a story on NPR that said 1 in 3 American workers are disengaged. They don't feel good about their work. There's no purpose. So the opportunity not only to have financially a good job, but something where I feel like my contribution makes a difference. So it's the waste hauling industry. And yet, every Cero worker feels pride and dignity in what they're doing because of the capacity they have to direct their lives and be purposeful. A third one is about place, right? So Evelyn says about we earn the money here and we distribute it and spend it here too. Mostly the products that we consume, right? Our sneakers are made somewhere else, our vegetables come from somewhere else, anonymous and opaque. We have no idea who's doing it. We can't see what's happening, right? That kind of anonymity and distance is what we've built a transactional economy around. The relationship economy in which I stay local, and it's the tenet of local production for local consumption. How do the goods and services that we produce here get consumed here, right? How do we think about the uniqueness of our place, not the sanitized version of place that our dominant economy strives for, so that you're meant to have an identical experience, whether you're at the Starbucks in Shanghai or the Starbucks in Columbus. We're stripping it of uniqueness of place and people. This economy is about coming back into relationship with everything about our place, our home, our community, and each other. And when we buy our products and services from our neighbors, those dollars circulate in the community and create more wealth. Okay, the fourth one is about nature, right? And Josefina talked about all of this lost organic food, this waste, which is actually one of nature's greatest assets. So one of the odd things, right? Human beings are the only species on the planet which produce unusable waste, right? In nature, one species waste is another species food. Most of ours is, but then there's all this stuff that we create that cannot be consumed or used by anyone, any species, anywhere. Right? That is an unnatural thing. That is against living systems. So nature can teach us a lot about regenerative systems. Cero is taking this thing that everybody says is waste and a cost center. The guy up there was saying, it costs me a lot to get rid of this stuff. And they're recapturing that, valuing it, and turning it into something of greater value, which will grow us food. So nature is not our property to be extracted and exploited. That is the dominant systems thinking, but moving from an extractive mindset to a regenerative mindset means honoring all of the assets of nature. And finally, Stephen at the end talked about relationships, right? And so here's where we come into a massive shift once again from this transactional economy where I just want to be efficient to a relationship economy that puts our interdependence, not money, at the center of everything. You know, we've been taught survival of the fittest, right? Buy low, sell high, win or die. We've been taught that competition is humanity's natural state, that we're all self-absorbed, rugged individualists. So it's not true, right? That's not who we are. I recently learned about some studies from the Greater Good Science Center that said if you give people resources, they're likely to give more than 50% away. Who we are as a species is fundamentally interconnected. My interests are aligned with your interests. In fact, our brains are wired so that my pain is connected to your pain and my joy is connected to your joy. So Sero is walking out of this paradigm of separation where we're competing over our interests and walking on to a paradigm of this interdependence and connection. We're all in the same boat, even those communities that have been most disenfranchised and disconnected from one another. Okay, so why am I going through these 5 things? I talked in the beginning about system structure gives rise to system behavior. Underneath all of that are the values that we place at the center. So if we go through this, if I value the right of each and every one of us to own and control our future, then I might choose a structure for my business to distribute equity to workers and to neighbors, and that will generate the behavior of my well-being being tied to your well-being, right? If I value nature, then I design my business to value the assets of nature, and it generates the behavior of eliminating or reducing or transforming waste. Right, so there's this cycle of looking at from value to structure to behavior, and behavior brings me back to values and shows me whether or not I'm aligned with what I'm trying to do. You can apply this kind of thinking to homelessness, to education, to healthcare, to incarceration, whatever system you're working on. If you want to explore the challenge at the center of wealth and poverty, you have to look at what the dominant system values. Right? And the most important question you can ask is what are the values around which the system is self-organizing? Right? So if you're looking at the healthcare system, is the system self-organizing around illness or around wellness? If you're looking at education, is the system organizing around testing or around learning? Is it organizing around exclusion or inclusion? Right? Around fear and scarcity or abundance and love, right? Those are the questions to ask. In your work, as you step out into the world to become change makers, if you believe that the dominant system is organizing around values that you do not hold in your heart, right, then you too might be a walkout. And that means you have some interesting choices about the path ahead. If you want to play a role in supporting the shift to healthier and more intelligent, inclusive systems, then I have one last piece to share, right? So there are 4 roles each of us can play. Let me go back to this map to talk about each of these 4 roles. Now, I say that you can play all 4 roles, that everybody immediately hears, I'm one of these, not 4 of these. We all play all of these all the time. This is not categorical. But just listen and know, and you may play them in different places in your life, at home and in family and in school and out in the world in some workplace, right? But listen for that, not defined, right? Everything is complex in this system, so things overlap. So Sero, for me, is an example of a trailblazer, right? These are the people who are willing to turn their back on the dominant system, eager to be free to experiment with the future, like we've talked about. If you feel like you might be a trailblazer, you have to be willing to be ignored, invisible, and lonely a good portion of the time. That's because what you're doing is so new and different, people often cannot see your efforts even when they're staring them in the face. That's difficult to live with, right? Especially when we know we've done good work and that we've already solved problems others are still struggling with, which is why we trailblazers need each other. When we work in community, we sustain the resilience and the stamina to continue to give birth to the new in the midst of the breakdown of the old. So, do any of you recognize yourselves in this role as trailblazers? Well, then I'm going to have to ask for an example from you, Ray. Will you give us so Sarah's an example. What does it mean to be a trailblazer for you? And briefly?
So I work in the field of disabilities, and what's coming down our pipe is that all the systems that we've built over the past 50 years are now being worked on and helped actually by the federal government. And so what we now are doing is developing a system that looks at each individual person with a disability and designing a community around it.
Right, so there's the way that the system is going in government and the way Ray is trying to take his organization in a different direction to explore. Okay, so we're going to do one example from each of these, and then you guys are going to dive into conversation with each other a little bit more. So not all of us are suited to the kind of uncertainty and risk that walkouts must face. So another role is to stay inside failing systems and provide thoughtful and compassionate support to those who are dying, right? To become good hospice workers. So as a skilled hospice worker, your job is to provide comfort to those who are suffering and to help the dying focus on the transition ahead. So you probably can guess this already, but it's my belief that many of our big systems are in their death throes, right? Our schools are failing our children. A lot of our food is making us sick. Our financial institutions are exploiting our citizens. But not all of us can walk out of these systems all at once, right? If you take a look at the curves, you'll see that there's a gap between the dying of the old and the emergence of the new. That is because the emerging systems aren't robust enough yet to receive all of us. These emerging systems go down. They fail and they fail and they fail before they rise up. So we still need fossil fuel to manufacture solar panels. Right? We still need to provide food aid, industrial food aid, where there's drought and disease. Right? We need hospice workers to help guide us through these transitions. I want to say something about hospice, which I also spoke about earlier today. People get really offended when you call them a hospice worker, which is very strange, because if you've ever met a hospice worker, they are some of the most compassionate, kind, and compelling people on the planet, doing extraordinary work. To assist in comforting the dying, to be able to face that, talk about it, and hold that space with people is beautiful work. So does anyone here identify with this role of being a hospice worker? Can we hear from you?
Sure. I used to be,
Yeah, can you give the mic would be great, thank you.
I used to be a lot more confrontational than I am now, and after I graduated with a bachelor's degree in anthropology, I actually went to school for counseling. And I just learned to be generally a much more persuasive person. As a counselor, I was always in the thick of helping somebody to transition, and now that I'm pursuing a degree in public administration, that's also incredibly important, because now we're talking about these big grand systems that affect everybody's lives. And it also relates to me on a more personal level, so that whenever, for example, my father told me that he was kind of interested in voting for Trump, I didn't get so upset outwardly, but really just wanted to listen to him and the despair that he felt that he had been betrayed by politicians and the government and the media until he was feeling the burn.
Yeah, well, I promised everybody I'd stay out of politics today, but I think it's a great example when, we are dealing at a time right now where there's a lot of anger, a lot of people are feeling that this dominant system is failing them, right? And it's not about fighting it out to convince them to change their mind. It doesn't work, right? It's the compassion and the listening and the honoring of who they are and what their struggle is that actually opens the space for conversation. Right? And so hospice workers are willing to stay in places that are really uncomfortable, that don't align with their values. Every single person, every role I'm going to talk about is supporting the shift to the new. They just support it from standing within a different place, right? So if you're working inside of a healthcare system that you think is broken, or a corporate system that you think is broken, or whatever it might be, and you choose to stay, you can still live from your values. You can still operate from your values even when it's in conflict with the dominant system, by being in this compassionate place of engaging with those who are suffering in it and supporting them to become more comfortable and reorient toward what's possible, right? So a third role is to make visible the choice, right? If you're an illuminator, then you love to tell stories. Now you might do that verbally like I'm doing, or by writing, or art, or graphic design, or murals, whatever it might be, something way that you're making things visible. You have to be willing to repeat yourself again and again and again, and to maintain grace, right, in the face of resistance and criticism. It takes perseverance to be able to point a light on pioneering efforts, right? Because it's hard for people to recognize different paradigms. So the illuminators are willing to stand in the fray, to stand up and be made visible, to try and say, hey, people, we could be on renewable energy, or local and organic food, or we could say every single person deserves a home, and shine a light on where it's happening, right? Making that possible. So does anyone here recognize themselves as an illuminator? Yeah, in the back.
I work with Live Healthy Appalachia, and I'm an AmeriCorps member, and a lot of the work that we do involves talking to people about healthy foods and preparing them differently. So I also identify as, I guess, a hospice worker in the fact that you're meeting people where they are, but not necessarily talking down to them about what they're doing, but making clear to them that it's always a choice, that you can eat better and find different sources for your food, and you can also always make the choice to be more active and things like that to improve your own health, instead of waiting for other people to give you a pill or give you a miracle diet that will change your life.
Right. So the illuminators are helping make choices visible to people, choices that they didn't know that they had, right? So the fourth and final role, for those people who have been quite successful in the dominant system, right, and they wield power and influence, and they have access to resources and relationships that can advance or destroy pioneering efforts, right? If you're a protector, then you're willing to use your power and position to consciously create oases where walkouts and trailblazers can experiment, safe from the disabling demands of the old system, right? They're the thoughtful and dedicated revolutionaries who live deep inside institutional life to give birth to something new. So I know we have a little bit more of a student body here, but does anyone here identify themselves in the protector role, where you are in a position of influence or power? No? Okay, all right. My friend John Barros, who's the head of economic development for the city of Boston, he used to be a grassroots organizer, and he believes deeply in land trusts. So he's created one of the best known land trusts in the city called the Dudley Square Neighborhood Initiative. And then he got into this position of power. And he's using that power to sort of like have all these quiet conversations on the side, calling the activists in and saying, what do you need? How can you guys how do we build a land trust movement in this city? And because he's bringing them both financial resources and political influence, he's accelerating their capacity to create change, right? So we must not exclude those in power from this shift. We need them with us. So by virtue of someone being in a position of power does not mean they're not on board with helping support the shift to new systems. They're doing it from that position, right? So understand, for me, I'm like, well, you know what? I'm all of these, right? Right now, I'm in an illuminator role. When I'm on the ground working with Cero, I'm doing the trailblazing work. When I walk into a bank to try and negotiate an interest rate for them that helps them get the right interest rate so they can still do what they're doing, I'm doing hospice work, right? So we all move around inside this. But I bring it up so that we can see that if we're trying to help create the conditions for a shift, a systemic shift in what's possible, that there's lots of different ways we can enter the system. So I want to invite you guys into conversation with each other again. So it'd be great if you could be in groups of 3 or 4, and then we'll just come back to talking together and explore, where do you recognize yourself, which role or roles resonate. So figure out what you need to do to be in groups of 3 or 4, not a lot bigger than that or you won't get enough time to talk. And really drop into that question, like really allow yourselves to check in your gut. What are you relating to, reacting to, drawn to, or have an aversion to? So how are you guys doing? Do you need a little more time? Does any group need more time? Okay. Let's just get a sense. Let's get a sense of what's going on for you. So I know that a lot of stuff, I'm not presenting anything else. A lot of stuff has been downloaded. So first, I just want to hear what came up in your conversations. Did you notice any patterns, any stuck places, anything that you want to share? What's cooking? There's some back there. We'll just keep you running, Judy.
Hello.
Hi.
I noticed that although I'm not a protector now, or I don't personally know one, it kind of makes something for me to look forward to in a job. So when I look for jobs in the future, I know I want to be a protector. I want to have this ability to help other people, be an illuminator, or be a hospice worker, or whatever it is.
That's great. You know, a lot of people who are activists and want to like change the world, they don't honor that incredibly beautiful partnership that can happen with somebody who's in a position of power, right? And it's a really good thing to look for, like, who are my allies? And how do I come into relationship with those types of positions? And same thing, a beautiful thing that you just said about coming into a job, being willing to look for that opportunity. It's great. Other comments? There was somebody else over here. Yeah.
As I look at all four of these, I showed this to my group, I think these are intentional and proactive. I thought I was yelling loud enough. I think these are like all proactive, intentional things. And I think there's also a role for people who are cheerleaders or support systems to whomever are doing these things, who come along and join the co-op and who come along and just stand with the illuminator and say, yeah, that's right, or something along those lines. So
I'd love to give that person, though, the real ability to choose that label, because one of the things that we do is we don't think of ourselves as leaders. And I think that's based on a false belief about what leadership is. So the heroic leader who steps forward and is bold and visible and has all the answers and is willing to take all the risk, as opposed to the fast followers, you know? And I actually think that the leadership that I'm interested in is very ordinary. And that when I choose to join Cero as a worker owner, you're a trailblazer, because that is a bold thing to do. That is not a secure job. It's not a recognizable thing. Nobody even knows what the hell a worker-owned cooperative is or why you're gathering waste. So it's, yes, they're absolutely cheerleading, and to recognize that it is small actions that are just as valuable in this systems change mindset as the big, visible, first-in leaders. And that's where, when I say it's like the small actions that each of us take alongside people who share our visions and dreams, each of us takes side by side, that's this systems thinking approach. So this very small, celebratory, friendship-based work counts as, I think, big leadership work as well. So both and, yeah. Great.
Okay, I was in the corner.
Thank you.
I think there's something to be said about the communities that exist within each one of these sort of categories. And I guess as a self-identified illuminator, I'm a journalism student. I don't know, I just was wondering if you could comment on sort of like the value of community within each of these positions. So like, would the media have a presence in one, or the government, or different things like that?
So not by sector, I wouldn't. So for sure that many people in the media are illuminators, but in terms of whether they are walking out and walking on to build a new system, well, some people in the media are, and some aren't, and some in government are, and some aren't. So for me, but the question of community is, it's at the core. It's the essence of it. which is, you know, it's all those little dots, right? All those little dots on the map, and it's not, like I said, the number, if you think of a network map or any, you know, here's a dot, nodes everywhere. It's not the number of nodes on a map, it's the quality of ties between the nodes, meaning it's the quality of relationships that we're in rather than the volume of people who are there. So when I talk about community, when we want to talk about what my colleague and I call the new system of influence, meaning the way that it is, then starting with networks and then communities of practice get us to systems of influence. A network, the way we describe it, is a number of people who come into relationship with each other really out of self-interest. Like, I'm going to join this network, this business association, this media association, whatever it may be, in order to get some value for what I'm doing on my own. When it shifts to a community of practice, is I'm not here out of self-interest. I'm here to advance the field. If I care about renewable energy, it's not just whether my business benefits. I hope the entire field changes and I show up whether or not my personal needs are being met. That's when we start to get into communities that we can really uphold some of the shifts. And there will be a point in time where these curves, I don't show them intersecting because they're two different paradigms, but they're going to start to bump into each other. There's sort of like the below the radar stage, but nobody really is paying attention. And then as the success starts to grow, people are paying attention, and then the system is going to attempt to crush you or co-opt you. That's where we need the communities of practice. It's the only thing that can resist the dominant system's effort to carve off, co-opt, or crush, right? Networks, communities are very resilient. If you think about like a router, right, sending information through the internet. If everything's around one hub and the hub goes down, it's over. But if you have a web of connectivity going on and something goes down, the system adapts. That's what we need, is a web of connectivity, whether I'm trying to do media or government or whatever sector I'm in. What does my web of connectivity look like? That's what's going to allow me to withstand efforts to stop the change I'm trying to bring forth. So, okay, generally wide open. What else is cooking from any part of this conversation? Where are you feeling uncomfortable? Like, that is not true. There's no way what she's talking about is right. Or confused, right? Yeah. There she goes. Hold on a second.
That triathlon training's paying
Thank you.
off.
There you go. So I make a comment about the systems in general. So I've been involved with an organization called Rural Action, and a number of years ago, we purchased a fledgling produce auction. And it's up in Morgan County, which is the county above Athens, and the problem was there are a lot of Amish farmers up there with land who want to produce food to be able to sustain their families, but the distribution was an issue.
Yep.
And so, as an organization, we came in and purchased this, and we ended up doubling or tripling the number of farmers who were growing. And then we did things, I don't know if we were, as an organization, a trailblazer, but in part an illuminator, because we went out to try to find places that were interested in purchasing locally grown foods, and we actually sell foods to Ohio University and Marietta College, take some to Parkersburg. But we ended up buying a refrigerator truck to distribute it. But and the reason that the number of farms continued to grow and the production continued to go up is because of the entire. You have to work with the entire system. Yes. Like with the Sero and the composting, you have to be able to distribute that compost. It has to have a place to go, and you have to market it and do things like that to make it work. So you've got to. I think the one thing that endears me to Rural Action is the fact that they take a systems approach. They look at the entire system.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the part, right? Sero, if they only looked at who they were going to purchase their pick up organic waste from, And right now, they couldn't get their business started. They want to have their own biogas digester and all of that, but they don't yet. So they can't just put their attention there. They actually have to look at who are the players that already are working with organic waste that might start to enter into hauling. Like you have to take a systems view. We don't, which is crazy. More often than not, we don't take a systems view. We take this is the industrial mindset, a silo view. But what you're talking about is absolutely what I believe is necessary. We look at relationship all around. Who do I need to be in relationship with for this system to work? Oh, here's my part of that. I'm just the hauler. But I need to be in relationship with a whole ecosystem of organizations and individuals so that my contribution can first of all, fit. It's not about, I know we are still in a competitive economy, but if I look at it that way, I'm probably not going to I'm going to need Uber capital, right? I need, hundreds of millions of dollars to wipe out competition, as opposed to come in and play my small part in a networked place. And that's what Sero has done. They went around, they were grassroots activists. The thing that they really knew how to do was build relationship. And so they look on, up the supply chain and down and say, who can I be in relationship with here? So that's one of the things that I think we really don't do well, which is to take this systemic view of our place, come into relationship with who else is here, who do I want to be in conversation with? Yeah.
My question is, whenever you have a group of people who are interested in understanding how the current system operates, a bunch of different people from the community, on a very practical level, how do you suggest that gets done? Who's doing that? So speaking very practically about that.
How people come into an understanding of what's happening. Have you heard of the art of hosting? so that's the process. I can give you a very practical example right now going on for me. So we look at the city of Boston and we say, wow, there's so much complexity here in what we're trying to do. We can't wrap our arms around it. In fact, we're trying to support minority and women-owned businesses, and it turns out that there are 400 technical assistance providers trying to do that and 300 capital providers trying to do that already. The complexity is too big. We can't even wrap our heads around that, and we can't get all, that's not 700 people, that's 700 organizations. We can't get them all in the same room. I mean, we could, but that would be arduous. So let's take a neighborhood, a very small neighborhood that's a real high priority in our community, and let's invite people, citizens, and all the intermediaries, the technical assistants, the government, banks, et cetera. Whoever shows up are the right people. And let's be in a creative, generative, collective intelligence process of really understanding what's going on here, right? Let's do a community charrette to envision how this community could be. Let's drop into a combination of storytelling from the place so we understand what's really going on around housing, what's really going on around gentrification. And then use these, for those of you who don't know, when I say the art of hosting, various processes of surfacing collective intelligence from the bottom up to see the patterns of what's true for a place, right? Those are things like Open Space and World Cafe and Circle, any of these participatory process that say, it's not the person at the front of the room who has the answers, or the person in the highest position in government or business. Just like in the beehive, that's why that metaphor works so well, each individual participant has a piece of the whole story, and we need the aggregate to see the hive. So those kinds of participatory processes and getting the scale right so that it becomes a meaningful conversation, this is all about managing complexity. The complexity is too big. So we decrease the scale, go deeper into meaningful conversation, and start from the value that everyone has a piece of the story, and it's the aggregate is going to give us the breakthrough. Okay, I can take one final question or comment if anything is burning for anyone. Okay, so then I'm just going to leave you with just a poem. So when I think about being a walkout and walking on and the great amount of uncertainty that's there, right? That we just don't know exactly how to find our way, and that's exactly right. If you don't know how to find your way, you're right on target. So this is from Subcomandante Marcos, from the Zapatistas, and he says this: "You thought I knew where the road was and you followed me, but no, I didn't know where the road was. We had to make the road together, and that is what we did. That's how we got where we wanted to be. We made the road. It wasn't there." So I invite you all to, alongside me in whatever way, to help make the road. Thank you very much.